The following presentation is a production of Ride the Wave Media.
It's the Best Birth Podcast, where we interview experts that elevate you as you prepare your heart and mind to have the best birth.
Each episode will interview professionals so you are prepared for pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Our experts will build your confidence and empower you to trust your intuition throughout your pregnancy.
This audio is taken from videos on YouTube. Watch the entire episodes on YouTube at Birth Made Mindful. You're listening to the Best Birth Podcast. We are so excited for our guest today, Katrina Bolduc, and she is a certified professional midwife, a licensed midwife, and the owner of Midwifery. We're excited for our conversation today.
Katrina Bolduc is a firm believer that a person's pregnancy, labor, and birth are one of the most powerfully pivotal moments in their life. She honors family units and embraces individualized family-centered care. Katrina holds an Associate of Science degree in psychology, Bachelor's of Science in psychology, and graduated from National Midwifery Institute in 2021. Katrina is a certified professional midwife and licensed midwife and practices in the state of California. She has proudly been attending births and supporting families since 2016, entering the birth field through prenatal yoga, doula services, and childbirth education. With a passion for helping others, Katrina fell in love with the aspect of supporting, encouraging, and helping others grow, with compassion, respect, understanding, and a commitment to meet each individual where they are at. Katrina is a wife, mother of 3 incredible children, an Ironman triathlete, lover of nature, animals, and everything birth. With a heart for helping and a passion for pregnancy, birth, and beyond, she is dedicated to the field of midwifery and enjoys teaching and supporting healthcare workers and families alike. Welcome, Katrina.
Thank you so much for having me.
We were talking right before this conversation, and Katrina has assisted in almost 230 births. That is incredible. Thank you for your service.
Yes, of course. My pleasure.
We would love to know, just from your personal experience, what led you to become a doula and then eventually a midwife?
Oh, that's a good question. So I have stage 3 endometriosis, and I've had multiple surgeries for it. So when I finally did get pregnant after being told I could never have children of my own, I initially went to see an OB, one of the OBs that had done one of my surgeries. And as a first-time mom, I had lots of questions. I was excited. I was nervous, all the things. And my first interaction was very disappointing. The doctor was literally closing the door as I was trying to answer or ask questions, and didn't answer my questions, spent less than 6 minutes in my room. And I just felt like for my first visit, for my first pregnancy, I wanted more. So I left feeling really defeated, and I really didn't know what to do. And I knew that that wasn't the experience that I wanted. So I started to educate myself, and that's when I learned more about midwives, about doulas, and I was like, oh my goodness, yes, this is exactly what I want. And then I scheduled an interview with a midwife, and she spent an entire hour sitting and talking to me and answering my questions and asking me questions. And that just felt comfortable and felt real. And I was like, this is exactly what I need. I hired a doula for my first birth as well. And kind of after that experience, it really opened up my eyes to kind of what was available. So prior to that, I did have some experience in the prenatal, postnatal realm with teaching yoga. But this was sort of a bigger kind of door swinging wide open. And that's where I really found that calling to birth work. And throughout that process, and then immediately after, I had friends getting pregnant and other people watching, yoga students going through pregnancies. And I felt like a lot of them had a lot of unanswered questions and were left feeling like, well, this is it. And not really realizing that there's other choices in terms of finding a new OB, finding a midwife, hiring a doula, like all of these things, they just simply didn't know about them. And so that's when it kind of became my mission to get that information out to people of birth is not one size fits all. Not all births belong in the hospital, but not all births belong at home, right? So really finding that place where you feel most safe and most supported, and then building that team to support the vision that you have. So kind of once that ball got rolling, it literally never stopped. So I've done so many different types of trainings and exercises and, continuing to build this wealth of knowledge that I have. I'm simply to support families. So that's kind of where it all began.
I love your mission in supporting families and just supporting the mother. Like, your work as a doula, you were my doula for my second birth. And I just felt so much empowerment, so much love, and genuine concern for how I was doing, how my baby was doing. It was such a miraculous experience. I look back on that day with such fondness and appreciation for the work that you're doing. I want to ask you about supporting families. Why do you feel that supporting the family, the entire family, is so important in birth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think birth is a family event, right? We are growing families. To simply focus on just the, maternal aspect or the parent that's carrying that pregnancy, I think we leave a lot behind. And I think as a family unit that is growing and is expanding, when we include everyone into that concept and into prenatal care, we really get into comprehensive care. And I think that's one of the really big differences between obstetrical care and midwifery care. And first, I would definitely like to preface this conversation with, I think all providers are needed. I think we need OBs. I think we need midwives. We need doulas. We need everybody. We need hospital births. We need availability for cesarean sections and interventions when needed. And we need ability for home birth. So all of those things are important. That being said, I do think there are some restrictions in terms of obstetrical care in our general healthcare model. Simply, in the fact that they don't have time to spend enough time with each individual person. Visits are rushed. You sit in the waiting room for 45 minutes, not being seen. You see a different provider every time, right? That continuity of care is not there. And the availability to truly have family-centered care is also not there due to the lack of time that you have with your provider. And there's no relationship if you're seeing a different provider every single time. So when we look at prenatal care as family-centered care, it truly is comprehensive. And that's one of the most beautiful aspects about pregnancy is when we have comprehensive care, we have healthier moms and babies. We have healthier family units. We have families that thrive better. So we're talking about things like, mental stress load and what are you doing to, support yourself and have self-care? What are you eating? What is your family eating? What are you drinking, right? How are you feeling about birth? How are you planning for birth? How are you planning for postpartum? Will the children be involved? What does that look like? Who's, going to be helping with them? So we really unpack a lot of information and a lot of ideas and further education, because families will often say, oh, wow, gosh, I never really thought about what I want, my older children to be involved with. And what if they're sleeping, or what if it's too much for them? So it really gets that ball rolling so they can decide, do I want my children present at birth? In what capacity? Who will be there to support them in the event that they don't feel comfortable being there? And how do we make them feel included? Because sometimes we have older siblings that feel like, oh my gosh, all the attention was on me and now we have this new baby and I'm totally left out. So with family-centered care, we're looking at each individual person of that family and building them up and supporting them together. I mean, oftentimes you'll have dads that come in and they're stressed and they have so many things emotionally that they want to discuss, but no one's ever asked them, and it's so beautiful to sit and ask, okay, hey dad, like, how are you feeling about this? Or, to the different partners that come in or grandmas that come in, they have questions too. And oftentimes they're great questions or they're great things to discuss. So really having that family there, that birth team there, who's ever going to be there during that birth, it's great to include them because they are the family, right? The family is not just the parent that's having the baby. So family-centered care is very important.
What do you recommend for creating our dream birth team? So right from the start, I think a lot of times an individual kind of goes to their insurance maybe to see who is in network that they could see for their delivery, for their care. What do you recommend as far as creating the team?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there's a lot of different aspects that we need to consider here. The first being, your provider. What type of provider do you want? Is that an OB? Is that a CNM? Is that an LM or a CPM? Right? Kind of figuring out. And then what are those things, right? I'm sure a lot of people listening are like, okay, none of those things mean anything to me. So, we have our obstetricians that practice in the hospital. There are a few that practice outside of the hospital, which is pretty unique and really amazing. We have certified midwives, certified nurse midwives who work predominantly in the hospital, but some of them also work out of the hospital setting. And then we have CPMs, certified professional midwives, or licensed midwives, depending on the state. And then also in your states, right? So some states in the United States, we have illegal midwives where they're not able to practice. So they're practicing under the law because women deserve the right to choose how they want to birth. And we also have illegal states where there aren't laws that say, yes, this is legal, or no, it's not. So kind of figuring out what makes sense to you, and then interviewing providers. And oftentimes people go, they meet a doctor. They're like, awesome, I met this doctor. They were so fantastic. They're going to be at my birth the whole time, right? As a doula, these were some of the things that I would often hear from my families. I'd be like, oh, they did not exactly explain everything to you, right? So if you find that doctor you love, it's important to see how many doctors or how many, providers rotate call, right? So we have some massive practices where there's, 8 to 20 providers that rotate. And so, yes, you might love this one particular doctor, and maybe you see them 1 or 2 times for prenatal care, and then it's some random stranger that shows up at your birth, right? And so asking those questions too of like, what does labor support look like? When do you join me in labor? And because oftentimes with obstetrical care, doctors don't come in until you're pushing or until certain interventions are needed. They pop in and then they leave, and then they come back to literally catch the baby, cut the cord, and bye, and they leave again. So it's important to kind of get those answers. And then from there, you can build what else you need. So having that additional support person, a doula who's going to be there from the very beginning throughout until the very end. So you have that continuity of care and someone who's there with you that entire time, supporting you, your partner, your family, whoever else is there. And then seeing what your partner feels like they need. And oftentimes I feel like sometimes partners get a little bit nervous of, oh, we don't need extra people. I'm all the support that you need. And yes, it's really fantastic that partners want to be a part of birth. And yes, they probably do a fantastic job, but doulas are also for partners, right? So sometimes we have labors. I mean, my first labor was 44 hours. That's a really long labor to expect one person to be awake and totally attentive. So having a doula is also for your partner and for your family. If they want to go outside and have, some fresh air, or go get a sandwich, or make something, or take a 45-minute nap, knowing, okay, their partner is provided for, they have continuous support so they can step out too. Also, you build a relationship with that person, whether it's your provider or it's your doula throughout. They know your birth preferences. They're going to make sure that you have everything that you need and desire during labor, and they sort of safeguard that space for you. So that in a way also takes away from the partner, so the partner can focus on you instead of focusing on you and then, oh, no, wait, she didn't want that. Or, oh, wait, she wanted this, but not that. But wait, did you want that? Oh, hold on, she's having a contraction. Right? It's a lot of work to put on one person. So having that team that's there to support you can really be fantastic. And then figuring out if you have any other family member or friends or anyone else that you want a part of your birth, children, and then doing a lot of preparation and work for them in terms of what it looks like, watching videos, reading books, talking about it, and then knowing that at any point you can change providers. So just because you signed up with one doesn't mean you need to stay with them. And this goes for anyone, doctors, CNMs, CPMs, doulas, right? If you get to that point where you're like, this is really not the right fit and this isn't feeling good to me anymore, or it was some type of bait and switch, they promised me this, they said this, now they're saying this, you can change at any point. You do not owe those people anything. And I think sometimes as humans, especially as pregnant women, we're in such a vulnerable state. Then we're like, well, they've been there since the beginning and I don't want to hurt their feelings and maybe this is best. And I'm here to say it probably isn't. So your intuition is such an incredible thing. And if you start to have those red flags or those concerns, go interview other people. Go talk to people that have had different births with different providers or different doulas and switch. It is literally never too late to switch. I mean, we've taken on clients 41 and plus before. We've taken on clients one time in labor during the pandemic because crazy things were happening, right? And families were not being supported and they were sort of pushed through these really horrible times. Their choices were stripped from them. Their birth support was stripped from them. And it should be a fundamental right for humans to have the birth team that they desire, no matter where they're birthing. And so I think it's really important to make sure you build that support ahead of time. So those people are truly in your corner, and everybody is replaceable. So if they're no longer aligning with your vision, then it's time to find someone new.
These are such great fundamental questions to ask ourselves when we are creating the best birth. The premise of our podcast is to educate yourself, to find the professionals, the experts, the resources that you need so you can create a really great experience for you and your family. I love that you talked a little bit about interviewing practitioners, because we don't have to just go with the first person that we sign up with or the first appointment that's available. We can go in, we can lay out some of our goals. Maybe we're asking them what some of their goals are, what they recommend.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a first-time mom and you've never done this before, you probably don't know what you want. You don't know how to get there. And there are people along the path to help you and to support you every inch of the way. When you talked about transferring care, tell us a little bit more. So in different states, there's going to be different options, but does your practitioner have legal obligations to support you? Do you feel like it's more just like a preference when you know that you're not aligned with them anymore and you need to transfer? How can we make this experience more positive?
Sure. Yeah. And I think a lot of that's truly going to be provider dependent, right? And also birthing location dependent. And so that's why creating your birth plan is so important to review with your provider and not only get your provider's feedback, but also discuss what that birth plan looks like in the facility that you're birthing, right? So with out of hospital birth, it's going to be very different than in hospital birth. And oftentimes I talk to moms that are, coming and seeking a different form of care with their second, third, fourth pregnancy because they've done hospital births all the other times and their wishes weren't valued and they weren't taken. And part of that reason is, oh, well, my doctor said all these things were fine. And then I got to the hospital and my doctor wasn't there. And the nurse said it's hospital policy to do X, Y, and Z, or they could only do delayed cord clamping for 60 seconds, but they clamped it at 30. But I was too busy looking at my brand new baby and my partner that I didn't know that these things were happening to me without my consent, right? So I think it's important to talk to your provider about what their feedback is, what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with. And then that's going to sort of be that first step. So if they come back and say, oh, these things I'm not comfortable with, and you've already done your research and they're evidence-based and they're safe and they're beneficial and you want to do them, that's your first red flag. So if they're already giving you pushback on things that for sure are safe and are effective and are your wishes, and you're not in labor, right? So when we're in labor, we're in a much more vulnerable state. And oftentimes they'll ask us questions at the worst possible time at the top of a contraction. Okay, well, Sarah, I see that you wanted this, but we're going to go ahead and do this. And you're in a contraction. So you're like, okay, whatever, like stop talking to me. I'm trying to focus here. And then we sort of let things go that were really important to us. So I think talking to your provider, figuring out the facility that you're birthing in and what you're doing it, but really those initial conversations with your provider throughout your pregnancy. So at the beginning, as soon as you have a rough draft of a birth plan or birth wishes or desires, talk to them about that. And then as you get closer, talk to them again about it. And you'll start to see if red flags are coming up. And I will say, if in prenatal care, you're having a lot of red flags, if you bring information in and you say, hey, here's all this information that I did the research, I looked at the evidence, here's what's safe, here's what I want to do. And they're still like, yeah, no, we don't do that. Or no, hospital policy is X, Y, and Z. Hospital policy is not law. This is your birth. You can do whatever you want. And it sounds like your provider is not truly supportive. Oh, but they're a nice person. I'm sure they are. I'm sure they are. I'm sure they're a great person. And that's why you're seeing them. But if that's not being aligned when you're not in labor, you're cool, calm, and collected, you're talking about a labor and delivery that's months away or weeks away, and you're having issues, that's the time to switch.
So if you're looking at a physiological birth or an unmedicated labor, is that possible to achieve in a hospital setting, or do you recommend seeking a midwife?
Yeah, so that's another great question. And I think one of the important questions that we should be asking obstetricians is, number one, have you ever seen a physiologic birth in the hospital? Because you will be surprised to hear that some go through all of their schooling, all of their clinical rotations, they become an OB and they've never seen a physiologic birth, right? So it's those questions that we're asking initially our providers, and as a midwife, I get asked so many different questions. And I would love to like ask people sometimes, like, are these the same questions you ask your OB? Because I guarantee you they are not, but they're important questions to ask. So depending on the type of birth that you're wanting to have, we have to ask our providers the same thing. Do you support physiologic birth? What does physiologic birth mean to you? Because it's going to be different for everyone, right? And some people are like, oh, well, a vaginal birth is a physiologic birth. No, not necessarily, right? So there's lots of questions to kind of ask. And I think that's part of that interview process and that initial information and kind of that honing in and education of yourself to figure out what exactly do I want? What exactly does that look like? And who does it look best with? But I would say if you are planning a physiologic birth in the hospital, I definitely recommend a doula 100% every time, hands down.
In your presentation, Merging the Gap between True Bodily Sovereignty and Physiological Birth, you speak of 3 steps: creating a plan, starting small, adjusting, and adapting. Could these steps also help in preparing for birth?
Absolutely. Yeah, they definitely will. And one of the key components too, I would just like to point out is as we're preparing for birth, we also need to be preparing for postpartum. And that's one of the biggest aspects that I see missed, right? It's like we plan so much for the big day and then the baby's here and we're like, oh my gosh, the baby's here. And I have all these other kids and I have a house and I have all of these things. And so as we're preparing for our birth, we should also be preparing for our postpartum because that's part of it, right? That 4th trimester is so important. And I think it's important to make sure that that stays a part of the conversation. But yes, I do. I think, from the moment that we find out we're pregnant, I think we have so many ideas and visions and wishes and, oh my gosh, I wonder if it could be like this, or I wonder this, or I wonder that. That's the time to start doing your research. And so in the beginning, build a birth plan. Start just writing everything down. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What things are happening or not happening? If this, then that, right? And that's one of the things I like to talk to my clients and my peer about is, we stay on the physiologic plan for as long as possible. We try all the things to have a birth at home as long as we have a healthy mom and a healthy baby, right? So for me, a goal of home birth is not home birth overall. That's not the case. It's home birth with a healthy mom and a healthy baby. And as soon as we start to deviate from that low risk status and that healthy mom and that healthy baby, then we start having conversations. And so those are really important to have ahead of time as well for hospital, birth center, or home birth of if everything's going great, here's my ideal plan, right? If we get to this intersection, what are my options? So let's say you went to the hospital too early. They admitted you too early, or your water broke and you went to the hospital and you aren't in labor. And this could be birth center or home birth as well. It's going to vary from place to place. But when you're looking at it from a hospital standpoint, when your water breaks, you go in. If your labor plateaus, they're like, well, let's get things going, right? And so often that first line of defense is like, oh, well, labor stalled. It's not really moving like we should. You're not progressing like we want you to. We're going to start Pitocin. And that was not true informed decision making, right? And the way that that was presented, most people are like, oh, okay. Because number one, it wasn't explained to me. What is it? What are the risks and the benefits? Why are we doing it? And then secondly, no one said, or here's your other options. Here's some things that we can try instead. So having that extra support person, that doula there is really beneficial because they're going to sort of merge that gap, right? So when your provider comes in and is like, this is too slow, we're going to start Pitocin, they can kind of speak up and say, oh, hey, remember when we were talking about interventions prenatally and we have all these other options? You said that you wanted to do X, Y, and Z instead. Would that be an appropriate option here? Is that something that we can consider? And oftentimes it sort of makes OBs or nurses or hospital staff kind of step back because they have a checklist, right? Like you're a number. And in a hospital setting, you're a number. You're, how many babies were born today? How many babies were born this week? And so it's sort of like they're so used to doing it. It's not person-centered for the most part. You can have beautiful, wonderful hospital births, but for the majority of people, it's not family-centered, comprehensive care in the way that I would define it. And so they sort of have these checklists, right? Well, it's like, okay, well, did that. Oh, labor's taking a long time. Start the pit so we can move on to the next step. And so when we're asking these questions, what are my other options? Can we wait 2 more hours and readjust? They kind of step back out of that, like, check. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. We could definitely try that. There's no rush. You're doing fine. Baby's doing fine. I see no reason to rush this. Right. So it sort of takes them out and forces them to have that person-centered care and relationship that we all want. Right. Even if it's just for those 2 seconds for them to sort of get pulled out of that, like, I've got my blinders on. Here's the things that we do to be like, oh, wow, yes, you're a real person. This is your first baby or your third baby. Like, this is your experience. And I just work here. So it's kind of nice to kind of have them kind of step out. So yes, going back to that, creating your plans, starting small, and then adapting and adjusting. And that's the thing. So we can have those if this, then that clause. And so starting with a birth plan that's big, write down everything. And then as you get further and further along in your care, start reducing and defining and pulling out a lot of, your fluffy language and everything like that. So by the end, when we get to term, we have a birth plan that's a single page. I like to break it down into several categories, including labor, birth, immediate postpartum, and newborn. So those are sort of the full categories that I like seeing on them. And then very distinct bullet point, short and to the point things. So when we have, I've seen them before. I had a family once with like a 26-page birth plan, and it is wonderful. And I wish your provider would sit down and read that. They won't. Okay. So that's why it's so important to have the short and concise bullet point, because if it takes them longer than, 10 seconds to yep, and put it away, they're not going to read it. Okay. So that's why we pull out all the pleases and thank yous and all of the background, because in reality, they don't have time to read it and it's not important or pertinent to their job. So we're going to have short things on there. No Pitocin unless medically necessary. Bam, that's it. You don't need to explain why. You don't need to say anything else. Delayed cord clamping. Put in that time frame that you want, X amount of time. No episiotomy unless medically necessary, which in most cases it's not, right? Or no episiotomy without discussing it with me first, right? And that's something too, that having a doula can be really amazing. There's been one time in my career where I saw a doctor reach for episiotomy scissors as a doula in the hospital. And what I said was, Mom, Dr. So-and-so just picked up the episiotomy scissors. How do you feel about that? And the doctor looked over at me shocked. And I'm like, you were about to cut that woman without even telling her what you were doing. And then she was like, no. The doctor got really upset. And then 7 minutes later, she pushed her baby out, right? There wasn't a reason for it. So having that extra support can be really helpful. And again, eyes, right? When you're pushing, your partner's probably close by. They're not watching what your provider's doing. So having that kind of extra set can be really helpful. And then again, so, you have all those sweet little bullet points, and then make several copies. That way you can give them to your nurse. They can scan it to the chart. And oftentimes, your new nurse comes on and we say, oh yeah, we gave the birth plan to the nurse before. And she's like, I can't find it. Not sure where they put it. They didn't scan it. And you're like, oh great. You know what? I have another copy. You can pull it out and give it to them. Then that way everybody has it. And then as you get close to actual delivery, then just reminding them, okay, we're getting ready to the delivery. My baby's coming really soon. These are the things that are really important to me. And talking to your nurse, really tend and befriend that person. They're going to be your BFF in labor. If you are not getting along with your nurse, if you are not seeing eye to eye, ask for a new one. You can do that. So this is your birth. If you have, let's say, for instance, you're planning a physiologic birth and you have a nurse that every 3 minutes is like, honey, please let me get you an epidural. Oh, you're in so much pain. Please let me give you this. Let me give you this. And you've told her multiple times that you don't want that, ask the charge nurse for a new nurse. It's fine. You can say, we don't have the same views and values on birth. She's asked me repeatedly for an epidural. I'm planning a physiologic medication-free birth, and I would like someone else that is better suited. And you know what? They'll find that nurse on the floor that's like, what, physiologic birth, and she's going to grab the peanut ball and she's going to come do all the things. And now you have a better experience instead of just being like, oh my gosh, this nurse is awful, and then dealing with it. You don't have to deal with it, and you don't have to settle, right? So being able to speak up and having your preferences laid out initially with your birth team, with your support team, is really going to help you. So you're not fighting and you're not settling on actual Labor Day.
Yeah, once you get in there and it's time for a baby to come, the moments of planning and preparing for what sort of birth you want, that kind of has passed. And for a lot of us, I think experience of birth is not something that we feel in control over. And so we don't plan as if we have the control. And that's one of the biggest regrets that some people can have, is not feeling like they planned the experience, that it was just done to them. So taking ownership, being the driver of this vehicle, knowing your options, knowing what hospital policies might be. You can go and ask a hospital for a tour. You can ask them what type of tools they have. The peanut balls are amazing. You can labor in the shower. You can use that hot water therapy. There's so many different resources that you have, even when you are laboring and delivering in a hospital, that I think everybody should deserve the birth that they want.
Mhm. What are some ways we can prepare our body, mind, and soul for pregnancy?
Yes, so many things. So I think when we're talking about prenatal care and postnatal care, it's really important to recognize the fact that we take the best care of ourselves when we're pregnant. And we're not taking care of ourselves to take care of ourselves. We're taking care of ourselves to take care of our babies, right? And so kind of that has been like a whole mindset warp that I've really been kind of focusing on, because I myself am just as guilty, right? Oh, well, I have to make sure I'm doing this and make sure I'm doing that, but I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it for my babies. And so when we're talking about prenatal, again, making sure we're not skipping out on that postpartum period, but then also realizing that this is an ongoing lifetime goal, and it shouldn't be focused just on prenatal and postnatal, but really on motherhood in general. So we have resilience on one side and we have burnout on the other, right? So we have this sort of spectrum of where we can be for everything: prenatal, labor, birth, postpartum, motherhood. And, sometimes we're like so resilient and we're so amazing and we're a super mom and we're doing all the things. And then sometimes we're like, this close to burnout, where we're like, oh my gosh, these kids, this house, these dishes, my body, I'm exhausted. And we go back and forth, and that's just the human experience, right? We go one way, we correct, we get better. We swing back the other way, we're really good for a while. And I sort of like the comparison. It's a graph, and it basically shows like progression is not like a straight staircase, right? So from here to here, it's not a straight line going up. Progression really looks like 3 good days and a really bad day, a mediocre day, a good day, a bad day, a mediocre day, a good day, a bad day, right? So it's constantly fluctuating. And I think we give our children so much more grace than we give ourselves, right? Like once we're moms, like our kids have bad days and we're like, oh my gosh, like, that's hard. I'm so sorry that happened. But then it happens to us and we're hard on ourselves. We're our own worst critics. Oh my gosh, why can Sally Lou around the corner manage all of these kids and keep a perfect home and her laundry? And like, I can't even make breakfast without my house exploding with chaos and fighting and anger and, and I didn't do this and I didn't do that. And we just have these like mental, caseloads and tally loads of things that we need to check off. So that's a really long-winded introduction to the question that you asked. But I think it's really important to look at the big picture first and then hone in. So things like rest and recovery during pregnancy, during the postpartum are important, and they're imperative, and we need them. Self-care, we need them. And this doesn't mean going out and getting a luxurious, expensive 2-hour prenatal massage and soak and mani-pedi, whatever. It could be anything. It could be waiting till your partner comes home or getting a babysitter and being like, I want to take a shower by myself without kids banging on the door. And I want it to be longer than 2.5 minutes. Okay, that is self-care. And basic needs are not self-care. So let's rewind a little bit. Just showering is not self-care. Okay. But showering for a longer extended period of time, using, your foot scrub or your loofah, using essential oils, that is self-care. Basic human needs are not. Eating is not self-care. It can be, but it mostly is not. Okay. So really focusing on adequate nutrition and hydration for our body in the stage that we're at, prenatally, postpartum, mom, breastfeeding, right? All these different things, eating all the colors of the rainbow in terms of your veggies and fruits, high protein. Protein is one of the best things that you can do for your body. When in doubt, eat more protein, right? It's not going to hurt you. And then really thinking about your emotional, your physical, your mental, your spiritual needs and desires. And again, thinking about creating a list, like what are my actual needs? What fills up my cup? What depletes me? And how can I create a way or a system or support circle or tribe, whatever you want to call it, to ensure that I'm getting my needs met so I can be on this resilient end of the spectrum and not so close to burnout. Thinking about things like education as well. So what are the next steps? What am I going to need? What are my choices moving into the postpartum? What is going to be asked of me, expected of me? What is my baby going to need at their wellness visit? And I think that's one of the things too. We're so focused on that prenatal experience and birth that postpartum comes. We go to that initial wellness visit for baby. And depending on, where you are on, your vaccine choices, they come in, they're like, hey, we want to start baby on all these vaccines. And a lot of the times we're like, oh, I didn't even know that was going to happen today. I didn't think about it. I don't even know what you're planning on giving my baby. I didn't have time to research it. And again, we're sort of in that place where we feel like that provider is an authority figure and they're saying we need to do it. And so sometimes we kind of like turn inward into our shell of like, oh, okay, if this authority figure is telling me I need to do these things today, I need to do them today. But you don't. You can say, you know what, I would like some more time to think about this. I'd like to go home and do my research. If I want to come back and schedule that, you can do a vaccine only visit. So you don't need to see the doctor. You can go back and do that. Or you can say, you know what, I'm not comfortable making that decision right now. I want to do some more research, see where I feel, and let's revisit this at our next appointment. If I have questions, I'd love to review them with you then. And you know what they're going to say? Okay, right? It's your body. It's your baby. It's your decision. It's your choice. So again, you are the captain of your ship, right? You are the driver of your vehicle, that Sarah said. This is your life. This is your baby. This is your family. This is your decision. I truly believe that my families know what's best for them and their babies. They live in their bodies. I don't. Okay, so you and your intuition and your education and your experience will tell you what's right and what's not right. And if you're unsure, then you're going to go to those trusted places where you can get education or support or unbiased information so you can make the best decision for you and your family. So that way in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road, you don't look back and say, oh, I hate that my doctor made me do X, Y, and Z. I hate that my midwife said this is what I needed to do and didn't offer me other choices or more education or time to make that decision for myself. Right. And so that's one of those biggest pieces is I never tell people what they should do. Right. If everything's going along great, we're low risk. We have a healthy mom. We have a healthy baby. We're cruising. And people say, well, what would you do in my situation? Well, here's all the different things you can do. What feels best to you? Right. Because you need to make those decisions, not me, not your provider. So the family unit should have time to sort of discuss those things and figure it out themselves.
You have shared so much great knowledge with us. I know that you have done so much study. You're just a lifelong learner. Do you have any favorite resources or books that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Oh, I love evidence-based birth. That is definitely one of my favorite places because not only do they give you evidence-based information, but they also provide all of the resources and all of the studies where they got their information. So you don't have to go hunt everything yourself. You can just go and find it, and then you can find these other studies and do that. So I'd say that's probably one of my favorite books. And I also I know a lot of people like sort of week by week pregnancy books, what's going on with mom, what's going on with baby. And probably my favorite one would be Mom and Natural. So Genevieve Holland's book. Hers is probably my favorite. I feel like it's really comprehensive. It goes over everything. So that's probably another one of my favorites.
Oh, that's so amazing. I'm a big reader and I can see in I keep track of all of my books. And so I can see throughout my life. When I was dating, I had a lot of books about dating. And then I had a lot of books about cultivating and creating a great marriage. And then my baby book stage and now my mothering stage of just trying to soak up all of the great resources that are out there. In the book, Birth Without Fear, January shares such a great quote that really went along with what you were saying with our timeline in birth. But she says, that's the thing about birth. We don't get an itinerary. We have to surrender and let go. And in that vulnerability that we find the courage and strength we forgot that we've had since our own birth. The power is already in you.
Yep. Yep. And it's just so important to remember that it's not one size fits all. Even if it worked great for your first birth and child, guess what? It might not work great for your second. So kind of finding that unique way to try all of the things, be open-minded, see what works for that time in space, for that child, for that pregnancy, and then do that. There's no wrong way to do it.
And speaking of education and experience, I did just want to ask, how has your maternal care understanding changed as you've traveled the globe?
Yeah, that's a good one. So it was definitely humbling, some of my experiences traveling and spending time in developing countries. But, I think overall, globally, there's still that need for focus on safety and accessibility. But then also it's really neat and beautiful as we're seeing this push for mental health support, which was never really included before, right? We treat the body, we don't treat the mind. And now we're starting to see people fighting for comprehensive care. And I'm like, no, you can't have one without the other. So I think it's really neat to see there's a strong desire for comprehensive care. There's a strong desire for a midwifery care and doula care. And with the global pandemic, we've seen this time and time again where the pandemic had some really beautiful things come out of it. One being a lot of people were exposed to out of hospital birth that never would have considered it. We had a lot of families transfer late to care that were planning epidural births, we're planning repeat C-sections. I'm just going to go in and do whatever the doctor said. I would never have a natural birth. I would never birth out of the hospital, right? And then it was, you can't have your photographer and your doula, your mom, your best friend. In Utah, there was even some dads that missed their birth because of the pandemic. They weren't allowed inside. So it was this horrific time. But we also had beauty come out of it, where we had these late-minute transfers that were like, I need my birth team. I'm not birthing in the hospital by myself. And they had these amazing births. And then afterwards, they said like, wow, I never would have considered this. I never would have agreed to this if it weren't for the pandemic. Now that I've done it, there's no way I'm going back. So we saw these really awesome shifts where more people were exposed to midwifery care and to doula support, right? And so we've seen globally an increase in midwifery care and doula care. I think I wrote it down somewhere. The CDC had a 22% increase in out-of-hospital births from 2019 to 2020. So that first year in the pandemic, we saw a huge increase, and that first year was the worst for birthing families. So we saw this increase, and guess what? It's still trending that way. And if you look at a lot of other European countries that have better maternal and neonatal outcomes than we do here in the United States, guess what? It's midwifery-led care for the majority of the population, except for those that are high risk that truly need an OB. So it's really neat to kind of see these things come out. Or, the new studies that just came out saying it doesn't matter where you give birth. If you give birth in a birth center, at your house, or the hospital, with a skilled provider, you're just as safe wherever you want to birth, right? So it sort of combats some of these old ideas and these old ideologies where doctors or, grandmas or sister, well, that's not safe. You can't do that. That's not safe. And so we have this mentality of safety and what safety means. But now we're seeing all this information come out of like, oh, see, we are safe at home. See, we are safe at birth centers. Right. So it's really neat to just have that additional information and see people trending towards it because people are demanding better care. And we're seeing that globally where it's unacceptable for you to see your provider for 3 minutes. I'm sorry, but it is. There's no way that they can truly do risk management and evaluation of you and your baby in 3 minutes. Right. And again, it's not their fault. Right. We have a lack of providers. We have OBs that are leaving the profession. For a multitude of different reasons. We have not enough midwives. We have not enough healthcare providers in general in the United States, and that is dwindling. And we need better providers, and families are demanding better care. They want comprehensive care. They don't want these 5-minute visits of, oh, my blood pressure was fine, and they said see me in 4 weeks, right? So we're demanding better care, which I think is going to shift this paradigm in healthcare towards more comprehensive care. And while I don't see it going, completely towards midwifery care where everybody gets a full hour because that just is impossible. We don't have enough providers. But I do see a bigger push on providers recommending doulas, recommending mental health counseling, right? Offering chiropractic care and acupuncture. So we have all of the facets of body and mind truly taken care of instead of, oh, well, I'm just going to check on you and baby and you're fine. Then we'll see you in 4 weeks. So we do have some neat things that are coming out, and globally we're seeing that as well. In India, some of my friends and fellow colleagues there are building an amazing birthing hospital where it's midwifery run. They're putting in an operating theater where they will have OBs on call and on staff if the midwives need them. Right. So we have this completely shift in paradigm of like, no, the midwives are calling the shots. Because guess what? They have really excellent outcomes. They have better satisfaction, right? We're looking at family-centered care where the parent is informed and they're making informed decisions. They're running the ship as it should be for everyone. So it's really neat to see the changes that are happening here stateside and in other countries. And I'm really excited to go to the Philippines next year and kind of see how they're managing and running and training and doing everything over there, because they're making incredible changes as well in terms of maternal or neonatal outcomes are improving. People are healthier. People are happier. So it's a pretty amazing shift. And I'm just thrilled to be a small part of it.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Erin has our Mom Squad secret for the week. She says, if you're thinking about breastfeeding, get support before your baby is born. Talk with friends who have had a good nursing experience, ask your baby's pediatrician, or meet with a lactation consultant. And that goes right along with what we were talking about in preparing and looking forward to it instead of worrying about it when it comes, or if there's not time to figure out your desires or your intentions.
Katrina, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode. We hope you've been elevated and inspired by this week's expert.
Subscribe today so you never miss an episode. And please share our podcast or post on your social media so that other moms and dads-to-be can also have the best birth.
Please note that the information provided is based on the expert's insights and personal experience. It is not intended as medical guidance. Please seek the advice of your medical provider as it applies to your specific condition.